Welcome to Voices and Visionaries, the podcast featuring the female forces in sports media. I'm Kelly Burke, and joining me today is the distinguished Andrea Kremer, whose credentials include Emmy award-winning journalist, NFL analyst for Amazon Prime's Thursday Night Football, NFL Network chief correspondent, co-host of We Need to Talk on CBS Sports Network, and HBO Real Sports correspondent. Andrea, we are entering month 6 of the pandemic. How are you holding up?
Day to day, Kelly, like all of us. Thank you for asking. It's sort of surreal, but this is the new normal. And I keep saying that the people who are waiting for things to get back to normal are going to be waiting a long time. So it's the people who are trying to be as creative and enterprising as possible in these very uncertain times that I think are going to thrive. How are you doing? How are you holding up in Florida?
I'm doing good. I'm trying to see the silver lining and everything, trying to keep innovating and doing as many things as I can from like yourself, your home studio or home office that's been turned into a studio. The same down here, doing a lot of podcasts, taping segments in the house, and just keeping my fingers crossed that there's some sort of live games for college sports this fall.
Right. And kudos to you for starting the podcast, because I think that's part of exactly what you were talking about, being enterprising and trying to bring some different kind of content out there. Keep people entertained and informed.
Thank you. Yes. I'd love to start with the NFL, who just kicked off their training camps. We've already seen more than 50 players have decided to opt out for the season. The NFL is not in a situation like the NBA, like the WNBA, like MLS, where they're in a bubble. The NFL is not in a bubble. So the players that have decided they are going to play, what do you think it's going to take to actually be able to play games this season?
A whole lot of discipline. I never really thought that the NFL regular season in a bubble was viable. You're talking about the tail end of an NBA or an NHL season that had already started. So it's basically juggling and seeding for the playoffs. And then you've got the playoffs. And you're still in a bubble for several months. The WNBA that you mentioned, they've got a shortened season. Major League Baseball has a shortened season. We've already seen what's happening with Major League Baseball not being in a bubble and guys just doing stupid things. And guess what? Stupid things turn into coronavirus positive tests. So I think that it is going to be incumbent upon the NFL, and talk about needing leaders in your locker room. Guys who are going to say, listen, I know you're young, you may be on your own really for the first time, you got a lot of money in your pocket, but you know what? If you go out and you do something that you think is okay, but it's not, and you get infected, and you bring that into our locker room, you're ruining it for everybody, and potentially even being a Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz and shutting down the league, which is what happened back in March. So it sort of seems so counterintuitive, Kelly. We're asking young people to be more responsible than ever. And it's not just in the NFL, it's in college, it's in a number of different milieu, but really for the NFL, that's what I think it comes down to, being really, really disciplined and understanding that a lot of people are trusting you and a lot of people are counting on you.
Andrea, you've done multiple stories for HBO Real Sports on Chiefs right guard Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. He was the first.
And thank you for saying the name right. I'm very proud of you.
I studied it. I'm not going to lie. I wanted to make sure. I'm a big stickler on names. As you know, I call games, and that is my pet peeve when people pronounce names wrong. So
Good for you.
I went back. I rewatched your segment that you did that I watched a couple of years ago. So yes, needed to get the name right. But I digress. He was the first NFL player to opt out of the season. What struck you most about his decision to remain on the front lines of COVID as someone that is a medical professional?
Completely not surprised. So we profiled Laurent, as you mentioned, 2 years ago, and then we just updated it in May because he had won a Super Bowl championship. The irony is we had planned to update it all along, and we had a date on the books in March to shoot the interview, and then obviously things got shut down. And then Laurent, who has a medical degree but has not started his residency yet, he started to work as basically an orderly in a long-term care facility right outside of Montreal, where he's from and where he lives in the off season. And even when we visited back in May, there was a hesitation and a healthy skepticism that existed for him. And it wasn't so much about getting it. It was all the risks involved, but are we taking testing away from the general population? And people really want sports. They really want football, but it's not essential. It's not necessary. And he was working really almost as a nurse because that's what they needed him to do. And if he was able to do these things, again, he has his medical degree, but he hadn't started his residency yet. Whatever he did freed up other people. And as he said, he had a guy who he knew who was a top radiologist in Montreal, and he wasn't able to do his job because elective surgeries and such were shut down. And this highly esteemed doctor was working in the same capacity as Laurent because everybody's got to pitch in. And just listening to the way he talked when he became the first player to opt out, I was not surprised at all. He has other things that are really important to him. And for him, as much as he loves football, and it's obviously very lucrative for him, the idea of stepping away from being able to help people in the midst of this pandemic was one factor that contributed to him just not being able to play this season. Yeah. And the other thing, look, for me, he was a long shot to begin with. He's coming out of McGill, not exactly a football powerhouse, with all due respect to the Français, but he gets drafted, makes the team, becomes a starter at guard, goes to the Super Bowl, wins a title, has the second contract. What else do you really kind of need or want to accomplish? So I think that having a full career ahead of him as a doctor is something that I think it just was perfect for him to step away to really take up again.
The Washington football team sounds strange to say it like that now.
I think I kind of like, somebody recommended they should be called the Washington Blanks. I kind of like that, the Blanks.
I do like that. I like it. It rolls off your tongue easily as opposed to
Blanks. And then, of course, it could be fill in the blank, but we don't want to go there because this could be a family podcast. So
exactly. They've been in the news a lot lately. One of the reasons is for a number of sexual harassment allegations made against former team employees by a group of 15 women who worked for the team and then 2 reporters who covered the team. You covered the NFL a lot. You have for a long time. I think you and I would both probably say that it's fairly accurate to say that every woman in our profession has experienced some degree of harassment at some point of their careers. How prevalent do you think something like this is in the NFL, or is this just an isolated and extreme incident?
Yeah, I don't believe that it's isolated and extreme at all. And when the Me Too movement really started to pick up steam a few years ago, talking to a friend of mine in the business, another longstanding female reporter, and we're reading about these various things. Yep, that happened to us. Yep, check that box off. Yep, I remember having to go through that. So I think that I hate to say that we as women, we kind of become inured to it. Things are certainly changing throughout society, I find, where people are speaking up more about a lot of issues. I think what's difficult is, and this word gets overused quite a bit in my opinion, the culture that exists. But it really does exist. And typically, Kelly, I think it trickles down. It emanates from the top, which isn't accusing the high-ranking executives of committing the harassment, but it is wondering if those high-ranking executives in ownership turned a blind eye to it. You have to know what's going on in your organization. It's just that simple. Even if you're an absentee owner, you have to know. You have to have people in place that are going to be able to tell you, whether you're Dan Snyder in Washington or what happened with the Dallas Mavericks and Mark Cuban and how they came out after the first Sports Illustrated report was so dire, and now there's been another follow-up report in the past few weeks. But no, I don't think that this is an isolated incident. Do I think it's a pattern across 32 teams? I don't know that I would go that far, but I would imagine that when the Washington Post story broke, you had a lot of people around the NFL perking up and maybe reaching out to some people in their organization and saying, where are we with this? Are we vulnerable? Are we guilty? Are we going to be suspect of doing the same thing? I certainly think that there's always a sense of guilt by association. When Ray Rice happened, which I've always said, and I remember where I was when I found out about it. I remember exactly where I was. And I remembered thinking, I've never been more embarrassed. This is when the video came out, but oh, by the way, why did it take video to come out for us to believe that this had happened? But the video came out, and I remember thinking to myself, this is the most embarrassed I've ever felt covering the National Football League. It just seared me. It was really, really hard. But it wasn't fair to paint every NFL player with that same brush. They're all wife beaters. They're all grabbing her and kicking her, and that. No, you can't do that. But as always, we live in a world where the few bad apples taint the whole bushel, if you will. And I certainly think that has happened to various players, and I think it's happened in the NFL. But no, there's no way you're going to convince me this is an isolated incident, what happened in Washington. It's not an isolated incident in the NFL. For me, Kelly, it's a respect issue. We should be able to do our jobs, and we should know, we should feel safe doing so, and we should feel that we don't have to apologize for certain things. And I've maintained all along very consistently, the double standard exists for men and women that cover sports in general. And I remember years ago, there was a male writer, terrific writer, and he was profiling a player, and he would always write about when they'd go out to dinner or whatever it is. So he writes about they went out, they were drinking, they got drunk. The writer actually passed out on the floor of a player's apartment and wrote about it. Are you kidding me? This could never in any universe happen for a female writer, female journalist. And if it did, can you possibly imagine the fallout? I laugh at just the idea. A woman falling asleep in the apartment of a player. It's
your career would be over.
Your career at 100%. Absolutely. So the double standard exists. And what I hope is that it doesn't, and now I'm talking about journalists in particular, I hope it doesn't affect their career and their career trajectory. And that's what you also have to be concerned about for those 15 members of the Washington organization, some of whom this was their dream job, to work for a football team, and they're no longer there. And what's happening with their careers? So we should be able to work whatever job it is and feel safe and respected by men. And as a journalist, if I want to ask a player, hey, do you mind giving me your phone number and I'll be happy to share mine with you, I may need to check back with you on something or whatever it is, I shouldn't feel like that player thinks I'm coming on to him. That I should be, because guess what? A male reporter isn't thinking that. So it's a double standard that exists, and it makes our jobs harder, but we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we're going to continue to thrive.
I want to go back to early in your career, because a lot of younger women see you now in all the roles that you have, but there was a journey to get to this point. And for you, you started off as a writer. You spent 2 years as a sports editor at the Mainline Chronicle in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Then you joined NFL Films as a producer and director. What did you learn in those early jobs that benefited you when you did eventually make the transition to on air at NFL Films?
Yeah, when I joined NFL Films, I was the first woman that they hired. As in those days, we wore many hats, and our titles were producer, director, writer, editor, and there was a long sort of L-shaped corridor where we all had our own offices. They called it editor's row. So I go in to meet with my future boss. I'd been hired. I go in to meet with my boss just to talk about, I'm supposed to start in a week or so, and to do human resources things. And I'm all dressed up in a suit. And I walk into his office, and we're sitting there, and he goes, well, first of all, when you come in on Monday, you can dress down. And I said, okay, good. Thanks for letting me know. And then he says, I just want you to know that there's some men on editor's row who think it's been way overdue for us to hire a woman. Okay. He goes, but there's also some people in editor's row who don't think that you belong. And I'm thinking to myself, I said, well, thanks for that cheery endorsement. I really appreciate it. But I looked at him and I said, listen, I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to learn. I had a whole lot to learn. I'm here to become the best producer that I can be. And all I can do is to let my work speak for itself. So I'll tell you a story, which I'm not sure if I've really shared before. I'll try to abridge it as best as possible. I quickly found out who was it that didn't think that I belonged. And that's okay. So my first job there was producing segments for Inside the NFL. And that entailed putting the week's highlights together, literally editing it, and writing the copy. And then you have to go in with the voice of NFL Films, and you score it. You cut the audio tracks, then you cut the music, you put everything together, you produce an entire segment. It was an amazing experience. It's like being your own individual production company. Incredible experience and learning that I got. Then once all the segments are put together, we have a screening of all the producers, because we want to make sure that we see all the video, we see what's in each person's piece. So it's really important. And it's also a troubleshooting mechanism. So we all kind of like hang out. We just sort of relax and sit there, and we're in the theater, and we watch all the video. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching this one segment, and I hear something. I go, oh man, that's wrong. I just know that's wrong. But you know how all of a sudden you start thinking, and then you start overthinking, well, maybe I'm wrong. maybe da 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 da, and you're the whole thought process. Is it like a test where you should go with your first answer? But I'm sitting here going, I just know it's wrong. And the segment was produced by the guy who didn't think I belonged.
Oh, wow.
So I'm sitting here going, what do I do? And knowing that if I speak up and I'm right, it helps all of us. If I don't speak up and I'm right, it hurts all of NFL films because it's a fact and it was wrong. However, if I'm wrong and I question this guy, now I'm really not in a good position. What do you think I did?
I'm going to guess you brought it up and said it was wrong, that you took the risk and did that.
I did. So I went and I just very quietly said, I think we might want to fact check this. I think that this is wrong and the right thing is so-and-so. And I was right. And nobody kind of was making a big deal about it, which they shouldn't, because I knew what was going on in my mind. So later that day, the gentleman comes into my office and he just says, thanks for pointing that out. And I go, yeah, good. Yeah, we're all a team here. Let's just say that he and I never went to lunch together, but his attitude changed towards me. And that was a huge learning experience for me because my work spoke for itself and I covered him. I helped him. And I think I earned his respect in that 1 week. It was very meaningful.
That's great. What a story.
This is my old boss from NFL Films, Steve Sabol.
Okay.
This is, I don't know if this was at the Hall of Fame when his father was inducted. Steve was a friend, a mentor, a dear person, being inducted into the Hall of Fame himself this year. And here's what I learned from Steve. I would, as a young producer, I would work 7 days a week, and Saturdays, my exciting life was 10 o'clock at night in the office. I would go into the vault where all the film cans were, and I'd be on a ladder teetering, thinking, oh my God, I just don't want to die, and my body is found 2 days later, Monday mornings. But I was working, and that's it. There was only one other light on in the building, Steve's light.
Mm.
And that's where I learned, never ask other people to do something you're not willing to do yourself. And that was a very, very big lesson. Again, one that I experienced. Now I'll tell you one, I'm sorry I'm getting on these tangents here, but I'll tell you one funny last little Steve Sabol story. So as I mentioned, I'm the first female producer hired at NFL Films. So we used to joke that the majority of the guys were named either Dave or Bob. So Steve, who was brilliant, but wasn't always great with names, he would usually, hit Dave or Bob, and it was a good chance he would get somebody right. So one day, I'm newly hired, and I'm walking down the hall, and Steve's walking the other way. And he says to me, hello, Andy. Now, when I was growing up, all my friends called me Andy. That was my name. I don't even hear it when my old friends talk. But that's not what people call me, certainly as a professional. And I stop into the hall and I go, Stephen, I understand that it may be difficult for you to realize that you've hired a woman, but my name is Andrea. And he looked at me and said, okay. And he would kind of joke, we joked over the years, it would be Andrea, he would call me. But it was the beginning of a friendship and a mentorship that meant the world to me, as I said, in a personal and a professional basis, and broke my heart when he passed away. But I'm clearly where I am today because of Steve and the faith that he and a gentleman named Bob Ryan had in me, and I will be very happy to see him go in the Hall of Fame.
I'm sure. Feel free to keep going down these tangents.
No, I'm
where we get the best stuff.
Reminiscing here.
How have you forged such a multifaceted career when, frankly, there weren't a lot of examples of women doing it before you?
I was given opportunities and I took advantage of them. When Steve, along with a gentleman named Bob Angelo, came to me, I had been producing for 3 years for NFL Films. And I think I was a pretty good producer. Steve and Bob Angelo come to me and say, hey, we want to do something different with our show. This is the NFL. Would you like to go on camera? Well, I had never really thought about being on camera. To your point, there really weren't a whole lot of women that I was looking at and saying I could be her. I wanted to do what she did. So ignorance is bliss. Yeah, sure, I'll try it. But I made him a deal. I said, let me produce myself, because I was a pretty good producer. I had no idea what I was doing as a talent, so I figured I could bail myself out. So I produced my own stories, except when I was in a position where I had to use multiple cameras, and then I had to have a field producer that was with me. So I did that for 2 years, and after the fact, they later told me that the minute they put me on camera, they knew that would be it, that they were going to lose me at some point soon. So I was at the Super Bowl in Miami, Niners-Bengals in 1989, and I met with John Walsh and Steve Anderson, who were running ESPN at the time. And we were just having lunch, and I didn't realize that was my job interview. Big eye roll. Because we were just sitting there talking, and I obviously end up getting hired as ESPN's first female correspondent. And I've always told John Walsh, the brilliant, brilliant John Walsh, one of the great journalists really of our generation, I said, I was your greatest draft pick, because he projected me. Here I am working for NFL Films, which for all intents and purposes is a propaganda arm of a league. And John saw something in me. He saw something in me that I had no idea even existed in myself, which was to be a really good, diligent, hardworking journalist. And so I joke with him about projecting me, because that's what you do with your draft picks, right? You never know how good they're going to be. So he projected me, and then I turned out to be a first-round pick, I think, for ESPN.
You sure did. Did you feel added pressure and responsibility being the first female correspondent at ESPN?
Look, maybe we all sanitize our feelings of 20, 30 years ago, whatever, because we want to look back only with happy memories. I don't remember feeling pressure like that. I felt pressure because, as you know, most people will go from market 100 to 74 to 23 to the network. I go from being a producer on air for 2 years, co-hosting a weekly show, and now I'm at a television network. So I didn't have that. I kind of went like, woof. And so there was so much to learn and so much that I was thrown into that I don't know that I really had time to worry about being the first. But as I progressed and I realized, and I looked around, and there just weren't a whole lot of women that I saw in the locker rooms or in the press boxes where I was, then you sort of feel that I don't want to call it a burden, because that makes it feel like it's something negative, but you certainly knew that you were not the norm. And I quickly realized that I was going to have to work harder. I was going to have to work more diligently. That double standard was going to raise its ugly head. I've always semi-joked that if Chris Berman makes a mistake, it's Boomer, but if Linda Cohn makes a mistake, see, she's a woman, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And this is just something that we have to deal with as women. again, don't complain about it. Don't bitch about it. Know it exists, and just understand that you do have to work harder, and everybody's going to make mistakes. Just don't make the same mistake twice, but just understand that these are things that exist for us. Don't let them be limitations.
Speaking of history, you are part of the first all-female broadcast team to call an NFL game, along with your play-by-play partner and your friend, Hannah Storm. When Amazon Prime initially came to you with opportunity, what kind of apprehension did you have to say yes?
Literally, I picked up the phone and my agent says, would you be interested in calling games? And my response was, no, fill in the blank. And I said, are you blanking me? Kidding me? And he says, no. And I start on this whole litany of why I can't do it. And he says, whoa, wait a minute. He goes, listen. He goes, the deal may not materialize. You may not want to do it. The time may not work. The money may not work. The contract may not work. There's a lot of things that may not work here. And that's okay. He goes, but I will not accept hearing from you that you can't do it. And that was pretty powerful. But until you do something, you really don't know that you can. And as experienced as Hannah and I both are and were, 30 plus years in the business, she'd never done play-by-play like this. I'd never been an analyst. So until you do it, you really don't know. But I give Amazon a lot of credit because we're an option. So if people want to tune in to us, they want to tune in to really hear what we have to say. And if they want to tune into the British broadcast, or if they want to hear Fox, then they can do that. We're in 224 countries, so people have these options. What Amazon did is took two women and say, maybe you don't want to listen to them, and that's fine, but you can't besmirch their credentials. And I give them a lot of credit for that, because I found out well over a year later that the proposal that was actually written for Thursday Night Football with Hannah and Andrea was written for Hannah Storm and Andrea Kremer. It wasn't written for two women. If we turned it down, there was no plan B. They just weren't going to do that stream. So that was a pretty big indication. And the first thing that I said to the Amazon executive when we took the meeting with them, the first thing that he said to us was, this is not a gimmick. And that was an important thing to hear, because yeah, you might be in a position where it looks like it is gimmicky, but because we had the credentials that we did, and we had the credibility and the validity that we did, I think that that was a sort of powerful weapon that was in the arsenal for Amazon when they went and made the pitch to get Thursday Night Football to go, and certainly even to the NFL.
Now that you've done it for 2 seasons, what do you look back and think about everything?
Well, it's my nature. I always love new challenges, and I'm one of these people that I literally feel that every single day I want to learn something. So that speaks to a part of my personality. And I fed it a lot during Amazon, because every day I was learning something, and I remember the first broadcast. So the first broadcast is a Thursday, right? So Tuesday, I'm still at home, and my husband comes home from work, and I go, hey, can I talk to you for a second? Can we go in the bedroom? And he walks in, and I just burst into tears. And he's sort of like, where's my wife? Can you return my wife? That's how much stress I felt. I just cried because I was so nervous. And it was, again, we'd done a few practice games. I felt that we were in a position. I felt you never fully feel prepared in this world of information because there's always more out there. And everybody kept saying, but you're going to get better each game. And I said, I understand that. But if we're not even good the first game out, nobody's going to pay attention to the second game. So I felt this incredible pressure. On top of that, I had received an email from I don't know who, somebody I don't know, a stranger, got my email address. And I still have it, the email. It said something along the lines of, good luck to you, two fine broadcasters. Please know that when little girls wake up on Friday morning, there will be an entirely new dream that's possible because of what you're doing.
Wow.
And Hannah and I look at each other like, wow. Oh my God, especially her who's got 3 daughters.
Yeah.
That was a whole different level of pressure and of responsibility, more than pressure, responsibility. So the night before the game, my phone rings and I look down and I answer the phone and I go, hello, Coach Madden. And it's John Madden calling me. And he says, I didn't know about this. I didn't know. How did I not know? I can't believe it. He goes, I'm so proud of you. You're going to do so great. I'm really proud of you. And he says to me, don't feel like you have to cram for the test. You've been preparing for this your whole career. Mm. And hearing this from John Madden really resonated for me in a profound way, and took my anxiety from like 100 maybe down to 60. But it was going down, so that was a good thing. The metric going down was good. But hearing that from Coach was really, between what Coach had said and a few other pieces of advice, as well as my old broadcast partner, the wonderful Al Michaels, they both had given me some really good advice on things that helped shape the approach that I was going to take to my analysis of the games.
Isn't it funny how people like that who have your back and are in your corner can make all the difference? I was on a game earlier this year in February, and I was doing the game with Mitch Holtis, who's the voice of the Kansas City Chiefs. Mm-hmm. And we finished the game. I think we went to double or triple overtime, and I got off the game. It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And one of my bosses from the Missouri Valley comes over and says, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? He said, I just got a call from CBS Sports, and they need an emergency fill-in analyst for their men's game tomorrow in Carbondale, Bradley at SIU men. We want to put you on the game. You have 5 minutes to go to the bathroom and think about it, but we need an answer right away. The game's in 13 hours, and it's a 4-hour drive to get there. So we need to figure this out really quick. And, it's that feeling of being, like you said, petrified, but my gut was like, you've got to do this. I said, Jack, I don't need to go to the bathroom. I want to do the game. And Mitch, at the same time, he pulled me aside and he goes, Kelly, you have to do this. You have to do this, like, you're going to be great. It's going to be great. And he was in my corner. So I obviously said yes, and I think I got 3 hours of sleep and spent 4 hours the next morning driving to the game. It was an insane 13-hour stretch. But even Mitch called me on the way to the game, him and my boss, Jack, just to let me, encourage me and let me know that I was going to do great. And it's just made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I love hearing that story, and thanks for sharing that. because it is vitally important that, especially as women, and especially if we're thrust into positions where we have never done certain things before and we really want to succeed, the support and the advice that we get from our peers, from male, especially male peers, is hugely important. And for me, it was funny because both Al and John said the same thing to me. Remember, Al says, he goes, 90% of the broadcasters use all this lingo and they have no idea what it means. And I think 99% of the audience has no idea what it means either, but they think it sounds really cool. So yeah, and I had already made the determination, and I had discussed this with my producer, a woman, that if I was going to be using football terminology, jet sweep, cover two, whatever, I was going to explain what it is. I don't need to have a huge 5-minute explanation. But if you're going to use the language, you got to be able to explain it to people. Again, for us, we're in 224 countries. We're all around the world. We don't necessarily know who's listening, but we want to make sure that people do understand. By the way, Hannah and I always say, isn't it great if somebody in Indonesia is watching and they think that two women calling a football game is normal?
Yeah.
How great is that? But I think that it was very important for me to do that, and I was pretty successful at it all season. So it's our last game of our first season. Chiefs are playing, Chiefs Chargers, and Damian Williams hits the hole, and he has a great game. So I'm on the replay, and I'm just about to say, he hits the A gap, and I paused, and I said, and look at the hole between the center and the guard. And my producer later said, she goes, you were going to say the A gap, weren't you? And I said, and I'd gotten through the whole season without talking about the A gap, the B gap, the C gap, because you don't need to do that. Just explain to people where it is. So we kind of joked about it, that yes, I did make it through the season without using a lot of nomenclature that people may think sounds really cool, but if I was using it, at least I explained it. And that's something that I do think is really important. And it's not dumbing it down. It's just making sure that people do understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's knowing your audience too, which is important. One thing that some people may not realize about the broadcast that you do together is that you've been doing them remotely for the last 2 years, which is, at least right now in this time of coronavirus, what a lot of broadcasts are moving towards is these remote broadcasts. We've seen it already with the NBA and the WNBA and MLS and a lot of the leagues coming back, and it's going to continue this fall. As someone who has been doing that already for 2 seasons, what advice do you have for broadcasters who aren't used to calling games remotely?
One thing is, the audience doesn't want any excuses. So if you're calling game, play-by-play or analysis, there's no font or chyron that says, they're not at the stadium, so cut them a break. No, that's not the way it is. People want their analysis. They want their excitement. They want their reaction. They want things. They want to be informed. They want to be entertained. And there's no excuses if you're not there. So 100% is calling a game with one hand behind your back. You're not at the stadium. You're not able to look out. I can't see the All-22 right there in front of me. I can't look at the sidelines. But I can't let the audience know that. And so I think so take out any idea of any excuses or any setbacks. Doesn't matter. You're there to do your job, and nobody wants to hear what kind of handicaps you might have. But clearly, you are reliant on your cameras. It's just that simple. For example, if there's a flag downfield, you don't see it because it's not in the camera angles. So you have to be very cognizant of just knowing that, see, for us, we knew no other way. So for broadcasters who are used to doing it in the traditional mode, it will definitely be different. But again, it's still a matter of, you're still calling a game the same way. And so I think that that's one of the big things is not letting the audience think there's any difference. And of course, the way you calibrate your voice. And what I'm about to say, of course, takes on even more import right now since there are no fans there. But you have to have the kind of energy as if you were really sitting up in the booth overlooking the stadium, not sitting in a more sanitary studio where you just have crowd noise pumped into your ear. So you've got to keep the excitement. And for me, I don't think that's that difficult at all. I didn't think it was that challenging because you're still watching the game, you're still reacting, you're still thinking ahead as to what's next. And when somebody scores, there's still the natural excitement that exists from that. So, but it's definitely different not to have that natural ambiance just around you as opposed to being pumped into your ear. Yeah. So those are a couple thoughts that I have.
Andrea, in 2018, you were inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You received the Pete Rozelle Radio Television Award. In a career of highlights that include covering 25 Super Bowls, what is the significance of that honor?
Truthfully, I didn't think it was ever going to happen.
How come?
Because I have done stories over the years that I know the NFL has not been happy about. The first story on the abuse of the drug Toradol, and first story on marijuana use in the NFL, on the abuse of cheerleaders by not paying them, and the harassment issues that they've undergone. And these are issues that I know the NFL wasn't fired up about. And the other thing, Kelly, I have to admit, is that I didn't lobby for it. I didn't put myself out there. And I was told directly from a longtime NFL PR person for whom I have great respect. He said, you have to get out, you have to pick up the phone, you got to call some people, you got to do a little bit of that. And I said, you can call me stubborn or naive, guilty as charged. Either my work is going to speak for itself or it isn't. And he said, you're stubborn and you're naive and you're going to be waiting a long time. And I go, well, then that's just the way it's going to be, because I have to live with myself and know how I feel about doing those things much more than I have to deal with having an award like that. And sure, I would be disappointed, but I have to live with myself, and I didn't do it. I didn't pick up the phone, because the other thing, Kelly, is as a journalist, once you start soliciting people, then they feel like you owe them. And I will never put myself in that position. Yeah. Never want to feel that way. I wouldn't do it. So I was actually on a shoot for Real Sports, and I got a call from the Hall of Fame, and it was the day that Terrell Owens had announced he wasn't going to be participating. So I figured, I've hosted some roundtables for the Hall of Fame in the past, And I figured, oh, they're probably calling me because they're going to need to fill some time and maybe they want me to do a roundtable. So when I got a break in my day, I returned their call, and David Baker, the head of the Hall of Fame, tells me that I the recipient of this award, and I was sort of like, just even now, I was kind of speechless. I invoked, are you essing me? I guess that's my go-to expression when I'm really surprised about things. I had to clean up my potty mouth, so I go, are you? And then I go, I guess it's good that my reaction was like that to you and not later on when we're actually in Canton. And he said that I was the recipient of the award, and I was shocked. I called my husband, obviously, and then I called my son, and I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. And what made the weekend by far one of the most memorable and meaningful of my entire life, not just career, was my family and friends that were there with me. Obviously, my husband was there, my son. My parents are both passed away, so my father-in-law, who's like a father to me, was there. My two oldest friends in the world, my oldest friend since I was 2 years old, he flew up from Florida.
Oh.
My oldest girlfriend in the world since we were 4, she flew in from Montana with some of her family. And there were, I think, 11 or 12 of us, and we had the time of our lives. The Hall of Fame, they treat you like all the Hall of Famers. You do all the activities, they have people that help you and take you places, and we toured the hall, and it was, you ride in the parade. I didn't want to ride in the parade because to me, I felt like that's for the Hall of Famers. And my husband looks at me and he says, what about all the little girls that might be lining that parade route? Don't you think they need to see you? All right, you win. I give up, you win. So I rode in the parade for that exact reason. Because, first of all, there's 200,000 people that come to this parade. They start lining up the night before. It's crazy.
Insane.
It's crazy. And there's a lot of little girls. A lot of little girls. And it was really important for me to be there to see, yeah, a woman can be in the Hall of Fame too.
One more question for you, because I know we gotta get you on to the next thing, and appropriately, it's going to tie in to sort of what you're doing. You teach a class at Boston University, The Art of the Interview.
I don't have enough jobs. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. As if you don't have enough roles and hats to juggle. What are a couple of best interview techniques that you preach and practice to your students?
Oh, wow, Kelly, that's hard. That's tough. We'd have to do like a whole another hour to be able to do that. I think that the importance of teaching, well, I think it takes on more of importance right now in this COVID age in which we're living. But I had always spoken to a lot of young people, and I always joke, I've been the subject, I am not alone, obviously, I have been the subject of many master's and PhD theses on that rare species of being called the female sportscaster. So I've been involved in the academic world from those perspectives. And I just felt that I wanted to institutionalize so much of what I've learned. So on the first day of class, I say to my students, I don't profess to know everything, but I know something after being in this business for 30 plus years. And I'm going to share with you everything that I can, both about interviewing techniques, because I believe it's really almost like a social science, as well as what it means to be a professional, because I sure didn't have anybody that taught me that. And I think that any resources that we can give the next generation is hugely important. And I think that the big thing about interviewing, to try to answer your question, is that it is ultimately the supreme act of communication, because interviewing for journalism does have a methodology that I do teach, but really it's just about communicating. So one of my students, my first year, she typically every spring break, she gets on the bus and goes from Boston to New York, and she sits there and she is on headsets on and listening to music or on the internet or whatever. So she comes back from spring break and goes, "Professor Kremer, I want you to know that I took the bus like I always do this year, but the person I sat next to, I basically talked to them the entire time, and I was using the techniques that you're talking about." The first thing I thought about is, oh my God, the poor person she sat next to for 3 hours and 45 minutes, whatever it is. But she realized that it's just a way to communicate with people. And I think that in this day and age, those skills, in this day and age, when we're on our devices all the time, those skills are more important than ever. So it's about communication. And really, so much of it is about listening. And people say they listen, but they really don't. And you want to be able to listen, because all of the information and all of the treasure to mine is in the responses that people will give you. And if you listen carefully, you can find certain words or phrases to play off of. And it's like anything else. You prepare for a game, and then a game breaks out. You prepare for an interview, and then the interview breaks out. And the minute you sit there and you start going through your checklist of questions without listening and paying attention, you always want to stay in control of that interview, but you've got to be able to listen to your subject and follow, because you are constantly reporting. I tell that to my students. You're constantly reporting during the interview. And if you get to a point where you learn something that you didn't know, you have to explore it. And you may go in, you always want to go into an interview with a goal, but when you go in with the goal and you're wedded to that at the expense of all else, it's a recipe for disaster. Because you may go in and you thought you were going to take this angle, but you listened and you realized you learned something else. Now you're taking the story in a different direction because that's what's better for the story, not better for all those questions that you prepared. So there has to be a lot of flexibility. You've got to stay in control. You've got to really, really, really listen hard and intently to what your subject is not just saying, but how they're acting. The minute that somebody starts with this, or the minute my subject starts like looking around, and I'm losing them. I'm losing them. I got to reel them back in or take a break. Let's just take a break for a second. I got to bring them back to me. So it's, I love it. I love interviewing. I love teaching it. It's made me even more neurotic than I am already about it. My husband reminds me of that. But I do think it's made me better at my job, because it's made me really, really analyze it even more deeply than I always have. And I had a great mentor, and he taught me so much. So much of my success is due to him. But yeah, I'm proud of teaching, and I hope that it's going to continue in this strange pandemic world.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's funny, everything you were talking about, because I literally have pages of questions, and there's probably
but then you get somebody like me who's got diarrhea of the mouth.
I probably have 15 or 20 questions I didn't get to, but it's good because we went down explored other things that, like you said, that the interview just naturally sort of tailed down these cool paths. So it's a good excuse to have you back on.
I'm happy to join you anytime. I really am. I think it's really important for us to support each other, not just as women, but certainly as journalists in these very, very strange times. And I I want to be able to do that, and I'm really thrilled that you asked me to be on the podcast as you're starting off and you're launching it. And yeah, we need to be able to provide as much content for people as possible, and try staying as relevant as possible. That's the key right now, because it's a tough environment. One of my students, who is fabulous, just got her master's, graduated in the spring, virtually, albeit, just applied for her 117th job.
The journalists, the young women that I've talked to, I compare it a lot to back 2008, 2009, the situation when the economy dropped out back then.
The only thing I would change up for now, though, in the COVID era, is if somebody's out there looking, take whatever you can. If it's news, if it's sports, if it's weather, whatever it is, get your foot in the door.
Absolutely.
Because as a gentleman a whole lot smarter than me loves to use this expression, the world will find you, but you got to be in a position to be found. So getting your foot in the door, doing anything right now, if you're trying to get into the media business, was, I'll leave you with one quick story that I'm really proud of, because I'm really proud of her. So, as you well know, I'm a member of AWESOME, the Association of Women in Sports Media, and I was part early on in my career, especially, of a mentoring program they had, and they connected me with a young woman named Jen Hildreth.
Oh, wow.
And she was graduating from Emory, and I was her mentor. And she graduates, she wants to do television, but she gets a job with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And she calls me and says, "What should I do?" And I go, "Are you kidding me? You're graduating college, you're getting a job offer." She goes, "But it's print." I go, "Take it, take it, take it. You're going to learn to work on deadline. You're going to meet lots of people. You're going to network, and you're going to be there. You're going to be out there." So she takes the job, and it's covering, high school sports, and because that's where you typically start. Well, that was just about when newspapers were starting to sort of have some video components online. So all of a sudden, they started needing her to do some video. Well, as you well know, today she is a great play-by-play and analyst. And I'm incredibly proud of the woman and the mom that she's become. But she started off in a place that maybe wasn't her ideal job coming out, but it got her foot in the door. And she has soared since then.
Yeah, she called a World Cup last summer and just called it a WSL championship on CBS.
Yep. Very proud of Jen. Very proud. As I am of you, Kelly. Very proud of you.
Thank you. This has been so fun. It's been my great honor, and I'm just so thankful to have you in my life, and to call you a friend and a colleague, and the role model that you are for all of us women in this industry.
Well, thank you. It means a lot to me, and it's something that I do take seriously. And I think that, as I said, the support that we have for each other, and I leave you the support for women, as I say, who do it the right way. You know what that means, and you do it the right way. You're the consummate professional, which means you're representing the next generation of women coming up, because we have to do it. It has to be done the right way. Otherwise, it's going to be short-lived, and we ain't going anywhere, guys. We're here to stay. You're stuck with us. Too bad. We're thriving. It's all good.
Love it.